Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is David, and today we have a video that's going to be a little ambitious. Michael from Fit to be Read, late last year, made a video counting down his top 150 science fiction books that he has enjoyed. So, not necessarily the best, but the ones that he had enjoyed the most at that point in time. And I said, I want to read those because I want to read more sci-fi. I was in the middle of really enjoying science fiction. I still am. And so, what better reference and resource than that list to determine how to approach my reading? So, today I am through the first 20 of them. My 21st, I expect to finish sometime this week. So, the time is now, it's pressing in on me to get to this. So, I wanted to talk about the 20 books and present them in order. So, ascending order. So starting with the one that I would rank number 20 out of these, and working my way up all the way to my number one, my favorite so far. And my thought is every 10 that I'll do a similar video, ranking 10 at a time against each other. And then every 50 doing an overall where I take that whole 50 and put them into context. If I ever get around to the 100, putting all 100 into context together. And then hopefully all the way up to the 152 or 3 that it ended up actually being, because he had a couple of extras in there. So without any more ado, I'm going to attempt to give each book a minute or less to talk about them and try to get through this in about 22 minutes. So here we go. Number 20, Starship Troopers, Robert A. Heinlein. Enjoyable first half, second half kind of fell flat. Really enjoyed the character development during the school setting and his education. Enjoyed far less the military aspect that came about, which is a big surprise considering some of the others I did enjoy. It was my first introduction to Heinlein. It won't be my last, but I was expecting bigger things out of it. Number 19, one that's going to make a lot of you fall out of your seat in shock. Dune, Frank Herbert. I am going to be the first to admit, I was never a big Dune fan upon my first read years and years ago, and I am still not a big Dune fan upon rereading it. I appreciate what it does. I appreciate what it's trying to do, but for me, the narrative is far too long and does far too little. I'm still going to continue the rest of the series to see if I enjoy the rest of the Herbert novels, but Dune is ultimately just It's not one that I absolutely love. Number 18, I don't have all of the books here, but I have read all of them in the last 2 years, roughly. This is the one that's the oldest reread. I read it back in 2020, and this is Ready Player One, which I've read multiple times. This is by Ernest Cline. An enjoyable romp, filled with nostalgia. Really fun and whimsical narrative along the way that has lots and lots of Easter eggs, cleverly hidden in some places, bludgeoningly obvious in others. Enjoyable, but never going to be as filling as some of the other books on the list. One that I will always enjoy visiting because I am a child of a lot of those things that are being talked about, and so it strikes a chord with the nostalgia for me in a lot of it. Number 17, this is going to be the first of 4 times I hold this volume up, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Interesting consideration of what would happen if someone were truly invisible, and the problems that can come about, both in terms of the person that is invisible, as well as society as a whole, if that person were to ever become unhinged at being unable to navigate into society properly. And I think Wells does a fantastic job of imagining that and considering it. So, number 16, The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. Slightly higher than The Invisible Man, but still really, really enjoyable. I enjoyed it far more than I expected to. A little bit of horror dabbled in with the science fiction of a man who gets stranded onto an island, the island of Dr. Moreau. And Dr. Moreau is doing some shady experiments, and it's really, really interesting to see what all is going on, how it interacts. And I will say that about the midway point, I was surprised at some of the events that unfolded because I expected them to take place a lot later, but I'm still not disappointed with how the second half played out. Number 15, War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. And this is not to say that any of these are bad by any means. There are just some really, really good ones up on the list, and I loved every one of these Wells books. War of the Worlds is a classic, and I imagine that the radio drama was just haunting at the time. And what Wells does really, really well, and it's showcased extremely well in this one, in particular, The War of the Worlds, is captivating a slice of human emotion and reaction in response to situations, and providing the reactions that you would genuinely expect and could fully understand why it would happen that way and why people would respond that way to whatever threat or circumstance happened to arise. And so really, really interesting premise with the aliens landing on our planet, not with designs to have any kind of a peaceful occupation or any kinds of peaceful negotiation, but to conquer. And yeah, really, really fun. Really enjoyed it. So number 14, we have Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a slim little novella. It's the only one in the Binti series I've read so far. But what I did read, I absolutely enjoyed. I read it all in an entire day, which is not usual for me. I had a very, very hard time putting it down. Provides a really interesting story. Things don't go quite the way you would expect them to. It's got some really interesting questions that it posits along the way of navigating interaction with a hostile alien race, and how that could all play out. And I really enjoyed it, and this will not be the last thing in the Binti series I read, nor will it be the last thing by this author I read. Greatly enjoyed that. So number 13, I don't have it to hold up, but this is The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury, one of the few of the Bradbury big ones that I don't have a copy of. And I absolutely enjoyed the stories in here. I'd say 95% of them were smashing hits, or at least above average. Really, really enjoyable. Only a few stories fell flat, and those, I think, were just the shortest ones in there. And your mileage may vary with any short story collection, but it starts off with a bang, with The Veldt, which is one of my absolute favorite Bradbury stories of all time. And it's interesting to see the narrative, even the little side narrative that's going on with the illustrated man and his illustrations on his body and how they are interacting with, and it's playing out with with a person who's there with him. So absolutely enjoyable, fascinating stories across the board by and large there. Number 12, I also don't have to hold up, and this is one that I expected going in would be at the number 20 spot. And then I read it and enjoyed it tremendously. It was a reread for me, Neuromancer by William Gibson, and I did not enjoy reading it years and years and years ago. I was probably in my very early 20s, and so much of it went over my head. So I expected, when revisiting this, to just have an absolute miserable time getting through it. And that was not the case at all this time around. I loved it. It had a really thrilling story, very action-packed, very well-paced by and large. Lots of phrases that are still around today that were the origins for that. And a very, very complex book. Still a lot going on. It's one that I think you could read and reread annually for a decade and probably still not catch everything after that decade. And just absolutely fascinating. I'm excited to read the rest of that Sprawl trilogy at some point in time. So now we go to number 11, and H.G. Wells is returning with the Time Machine. This is the best of the Wells in here. There are two I haven't read. Neither of those are on Michael's list. But this is an absolute classic tale of a man who has built a time machine and goes missing. And he's recounting the adventures that he went on while he was traveling through time to a group of people in the modern day. And that presents a really interesting premise because you don't see things happening. You know that in spite of all the danger he's going through, that he's going to come out okay because he's there in the present telling all of this. But at the same time, it still is riveting and fascinating on the adventure he goes on and what he encounters along the way. And it's short enough that it could be read in a single sitting, much like Binti, probably a little bit longer than that, but still a really, really enjoyable read, and one that I plan to visit again and again, along with all of the Wells, because they were just all really enjoyable for the length that they had and the age that they have. They are fantastic stories. All right, number 10. Can't hold it up, don't own a copy yet, but it is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Really, really enjoyable. Opening to a trilogy that now has a second trilogy that's just about wrapped up. I've read the entire first trilogy, but focusing just on the first book, it is imagining that it is along the lines of the Hunger Games almost. A revenge story told that goes through the almost tropey, stereotypical at this point in time of a young person who is pitted against his peers and has to compete to be the fittest, the strongest, the smartest. But it's done extremely well. It's a brutal, ruthless story which carries on through the rest of the series. Characters that you love are not safe in that, which is always great because it gives real stakes to the feeling of what is going on in there. And this has just got twists and turns along the way. The whole trilogy continues with that. You'll be shocked and surprised by some of the things that transpire. And Red Rising was really, really enjoyable. It took me by surprise because I had not expected to love it, but I did end up loving it. So number 9, we have Ender's Shadow by Orson Scott Card. It was my first time encountering this. It's the story of Bean, who is the shortest person in Battle School, following very much in the footsteps of Ender Wiggin, the protagonist from Ender's Game. And getting to see his side of it, getting to see a lot of his development, his background, what life was like for him before he got to Battle School. And the afterwards, the world building that Card is doing by fleshing out this character is just fantastic. And it's a really interesting parallel that has enough of its own interesting things and twists and nuances to make it very much stand well on its own. So regardless of whether you've read Ender's Game or not, this could still be enjoyable. But it's definitely a richer experience knowing Ender's Game. Number 8, I Can't Hold Up. It is the Murderbot series. So in particular, All Systems Red, which is the first of them by Martha Wells. I've read the first 2 and tremendously enjoy Murderbot. I wish they were a little longer, but my understanding from those that have read it is that the longer ones are the less enjoyable ones. So maybe Murderbot's best in the smaller bite-sized chunks in the novella format. But it is a tale of a robot who's designed to do exactly what you would expect from the name, to murder things. It is a brutal, ruthless killing machine when it wants to be. But all it really wants to do is to just be alone and binge watch television shows that it's downloaded into its programming. It's just got a very fun, very unique personality that is tremendously enjoyable. And that is what steals the show, is the personality of Murderbot, who is telling the story along the way. Number 7, I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. This was grouped together with Caves of Steel. And I'm separating them out because I have not read Caves of Steel yet. It's one of the on the short list of ones I'm going to be getting to next. So expect that to be in the next grouping of 10. And these are excellent short stories featuring things like the 3 laws of robotics and interesting premises of what happens when some of those things go wrong. And seeing how robots interact when put in situations where those things are pushed and tested. And humans are brought in to, to cause invariable causes and effects with the robots. And there's some really, really good standout stories in there. If nothing else, I mean, the fact that it's told through short stories makes it an easy one to read through, but they all tell a continuous narrative over the course of the time from when the first robots have been built to an ending point that feels very, very enjoyable and satisfactory all on its own in this one book. So definitely, strongly recommend. Number 6, we have The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. And The Martian Chronicles is excellent. It is the best short story collection that I've read on this list so far. Narrowly surpasses Asimov and I, Robot. It is a very, very slim margin here. And The Martian Chronicles, again, just like that one, just like I, Robot, tells a continuous narrative of mankind's first landing on Mars through to when mankind leaves Mars. And lots and lots of fun stories. It's got little short asides between the stories that are developing a lot of what's transpiring as a whole across the span of time, and just some fantastic stories along the way, including standouts like Usher 2, which, as you might expect, has a lot of Edgar Allan Poe vibes in it. It's just fantastic. Bradbury at some of his finest writing right there in The Martian Chronicles. Number 5, we have The Stars My Destination by Alfred Bester. This is revenge story done at its best. This is the Count of Monte Cristo level of revenge in about a fifth of the length. It has got an extremely unlikable protagonist. I don't think he's meant to be likable. I think the focus is more on the circumstances, the ideas presented, and the tale of revenge that goes on. And it's just a wild ride. Really, really enjoyable. And some fascinating premises that I am going to be happy to enjoy time and time again, because this was fantastic. And I strongly, strongly recommend it. Number 4, we have The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, just narrowly beating out Bester. And this is wonderful. This evoked strong emotions towards the end of it. The entire trilogy is great. I'm going to talk more about that later. But this is a fantastic story. This is what I would like for my military science fiction, more so than Starship Troopers. This told really, really interesting stories. It had great character development. It kind of had 3 acts, because in the middle, there are some sections where the protagonist gets to go home for short spans of time and tries to get back into Earth. And the premise is that he's fighting this war that's going on forever, because traveling through space to the battle destination, it might take him 1 year to get there. But everyone around that's not on that travel has aged tremendously. And so he's living through generations over the course of this war. And it's just really, really interesting premise. and masterfully executed. Number 3, and here we have some really tough decisions I had to make. We have Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I've loved this since high school, since it was first introduced to me. It is one of my most read books of all time, and it did not disappoint again on a reread. Even as I get older, I still enjoy this so much. The Tale of Ender is going to be one that always sticks with me. So part of it is probably nostalgia, but part of it is just this is just a really good story being told of Ender and his time in battle school, which battle school was just a wonderful imaginary premise in itself, and the war with the buggers and how that's going to all unfold as humanity is getting desperate. That leads us to number 2. We have Fahrenheit 451. Oh my goodness. I forgot how wonderful this book was. It is fantastic. It is easily one of my absolute favorite books of all time. And with good reason. It is a great picture of dystopian future that is haunting, and how accurate it feels now, looking back at it, as to some of the predictions, some of the trajectories that Bradbury forecasted, and how those could still today be seen as something that could very easily come true, and how close he was on imagining some of the technology, such as having the walls in your house become interactive television shows. You could imagine that happening, and that people that they just get consumed by those things, and that's all they're being pushed to just do those kinds of things, to go do the things that make you feel good, but don't try to learn, don't try to grow and develop as a person. Just go and drive really fast, go and kick a dog if it makes you feel better, go and just relax and interact with the family in the show. Such a haunting reality that, yeah, it gave me chills. And so number 1 probably will not come as a surprise to anybody, because if you've been watching for a while, you know this was my number 1 read last year, and that's Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Oh my gosh, this is magnificent. It is so good. It is not a book for everybody. This is going to be the hardest book that I love to be able to recommend to people to read, because it's told in a way that is not necessarily as engaging to everyone, because it's told in very long stories, much like Canterbury Tales, where it draws a lot of inspiration from, and the stories within it, so many of them resonated really well with me. The planet Keats, having a poet who was a reincarnation almost of John Keats, having a story where a guy's traveling through major battles, including some of the battles that I just absolutely love historically in the medieval period, and just everything coming together to tell a really good narrative along the way, that you don't even mind at the end of it that it didn't really reach a conclusion yet in this book, other than the fact that you're just going to want to immediately start reading that next one if you can. And I would strongly recommend, if you're going to pick up Hyperion, pick up the Fall of Hyperion at the same time, so that when you do finish it, you can go right into the next book, because it's a lot easier to do that than to finish this and say, I'm going to eventually get to that next book, because then it becomes easier to put it off with time. So there you have it. There's my ranking of the 20. We did okay, about 22 and a half minutes, so roughly a minute a book. So I'll just end it here. I hope you had a great day, and be sure and let me know, which of these have you read? Do you disagree? Do you agree with any of these rankings? Have you seen Michael's video? I strongly recommend that you go check that out. I will have that linked in the description down below, so you can go watch it. It is well worth the almost 2 hours to see his production and hear him talking about all of these books. I hope you have a great day, and thank you, BookTube.